They never noticed. Not when I stayed up late trying to fix things that were never mine to carry. Not when I quietly gave up the little things I wanted, just so everyone else could have what they needed. Not even when I was falling apart, right in front of them. To them, I was just the one who could handle it, the reliable one, the strong one, the one who would always show up, no matter what. And maybe that was the problem. Because when you're always the strong one, people forget to ask if you're tired. They assume you're fine. They assume you don't need help. They assume you don't break. And by the time they finally realize everything you've been carrying, it's already too late. My name is Caroline Hayes. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my life, I was the invisible glue holding my family together. Not because I wanted to be, but because someone had to be. I wasn't the oldest. That was my brother, Evan. Evan was everything I wasn't: confident, carefree, the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately owned it. But he also had a habit of walking away from responsibility. Plans didn't last. Jobs didn't last. Commitments didn't last. But somehow, he always believed something better was just around the corner, and whenever things fell apart for him, someone else was there to pick up the pieces. Most of the time, that someone was me. Then there was my younger sister, Sarah. Sarah was soft in a way I never got to be, sensitive, emotional, the kind of person who felt everything deeply. She cried easily, got overwhelmed easily, needed reassurance constantly, and because of that, everyone treated her like she needed protecting, and I didn't. No one ever said it out loud, but I could feel it. Sarah needed care. Evan needed support, and me, I just needed to be strong. That's how it always was. Growing up, my parents were constantly overwhelmed, not because they didn't care, but because life had a way of piling things on them all at once. My dad worked long hours, sometimes 2 jobs. He came home exhausted, barely speaking, just trying to recover enough to do it all again the next day. My mum tried to hold everything together: bills, house, children, emotions, but there were too many things and not enough time. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, I stepped in, not because anyone officially asked me to, but because I could see what needed to be done, and I didn't know how to ignore it. Caroline, can you watch Sarah for a bit? That started it. Then it became, Caroline, can you help your brother with his homework? Then, Caroline, can you handle dinner tonight? And slowly, without anyone really noticing, those small favors turned into expectations, and those expectations became my role. At first, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like I mattered, like I was important, like I was needed. And when you're young, being needed feels a lot like being loved. So I leaned into it. I became dependable, reliable, the one who could fix things, the one who could keep everything running smoothly, the one who didn't cause problems, but solved them. And for a while, that felt like enough. But as I got older, something started to change, because being needed is not the same as being appreciated, and I was starting to feel the difference. By the time I was 14, I had already learned things most kids my age didn't even think about. I knew which bills were due. I knew how to stretch groceries to last longer. I knew how to calm Sarah down when she had one of her emotional breakdowns. I knew how to cover for Evan when he messed up again. I knew how to read my parents' moods and adjust myself accordingly. I became careful, observant, quietly responsible. Not because I wanted to be, but because I didn't feel like I had a choice. While other kids were out living their lives, I was at home, making sure everything didn't fall apart. I remember one evening, very clearly, there was a school event. Nothing big, just something simple, but it mattered to me. I had been looking forward to it for weeks. I even picked out what I was going to wear. For once, I wanted to be like everyone else, just a normal teenager. But that evening, my mum looked at me and said, "Caroline, I need you to stay home with Sarah. She's not feeling well." I didn't argue, I didn't complain, I just nodded, and I stayed. I watched everyone else's pictures later that night, smiling, laughing, living, and I told myself it was okay. Because that's what I always told myself, it's okay. That became my habit, my default response to everything I gave up. It's okay if I don't go. It's okay if I don't get that. It's okay if I wait. It's okay. Until one day, it wasn't. But back then, I didn't know that yet. Back then, I still believed that if I kept showing up, if I kept helping, if I kept putting everyone else first, it would mean something. That someone would notice, that someone would say, "Caroline, you've done enough." But that moment never came. Instead, the expectations grew. By the time I was 16, I wasn't just helping anymore. I was managing things, cooking full meals, making sure the house stayed in order, helping Sarah with school, cleaning up after Evan's messes, and making sure my parents didn't have one more thing to worry about. And the strangest part? No one questioned it. No one stopped and said, maybe this is too much for her. Because I made it look easy. I didn't complain. I didn't push back. I didn't show how tired I really was. And when you make something look easy, people assume it is. That's something I learned the hard way. I learned how to hide exhaustion, how to smile when I didn't feel like smiling, how to say, I'm fine, even when I wasn't. And over time, that became who I was, not just to them, but to myself. I stopped asking what I wanted, because it didn't seem important anymore. I stopped expecting help, because I wasn't used to receiving it. And I stopped imagining a life where I didn't have to carry everything, because I didn't think that life existed for me. Then came my first job. I still remember how proud I felt, not because of the job itself, but because it felt like something that was finally mine, something I had earned, something I could use to build a life for myself. But that feeling didn't last long, because almost immediately, that income became something else, another way to help, another way to carry more, and without hesitation, I gave, because that's what I had always done. And at that point, it didn't even feel like a choice anymore. It felt like who I was, the one who shows up, the one who sacrifices, the one who holds everything together, even if it meant slowly losing herself in the process. And the truth is, no one noticed. Not then, not when it mattered, not when I was still hoping someone would, because to them, everything was working, everything was fine. And I made sure it stayed that way, even if it cost me more than anyone ever realized. As I got older, nothing really changed. It just got heavier. The responsibilities didn't go away. They evolved, and somehow they grew with me. By the time I was in my 20s, I wasn't just helping anymore. I was supporting, carrying, stabilizing things that were never supposed to rest on my shoulders. I got a full-time job, and for the first time, I thought maybe things would be different. Maybe now, I could start building something for myself, a life that didn't revolve around fixing everyone else's problems. But that thought didn't last long, because almost immediately, my income became another solution, another safety net, another reason for everyone to lean on me. Just for a while, my mum would say, things will get better soon. But quote, a while turned into years, and quote, soon never came. There was always something. Evan needed money, again. This time it was a business idea. Before that it was rent. Before that it was something else I can't even remember anymore, because there were so many. And every time, I stepped in, because that's what I had always done. That's who I had always been. The one who fixes things. The one who keeps everything from falling apart. And for a long time, I didn't question it, because I told myself something that felt true, but wasn't. If I don't do it, who will? That sentence kept me stuck for years, because it made everything feel like my responsibility, even when it wasn't, even when it shouldn't have been. Sarah was different. She didn't ask for money the way Evan did, but she needed something else: support, reassurance, someone to lean on emotionally. And that someone was always me. Late-night calls, tears, moments where she felt like everything was falling apart, and I would be there, listening, comforting, holding her together, even when I felt like I was falling apart myself. And the truth is, I didn't mind being there for her. I loved my sister, I still do, but there's a difference between being there for someone and being the only one they rely on, and I had become that, for everyone, even my parents. The older I got, the more they depended on me, not because they didn't care, but because I had made it easy. I never said no. I never pushed back. I never showed them how much it was costing me. So to them, it didn't seem like a cost at all. It just seemed like who I was. Reliable, available, unbreakable. But I wasn't. I just got very good at pretending. There were days I would sit at my desk at work, staring at my screen, and realize I hadn't taken a full breath in hours. Like my body was constantly bracing for something, waiting, carrying, never fully resting. Even when I was alone, my mind wasn't. It was filled with everything: bills, problems, responsibilities, expectations, things that didn't belong to me, but lived in me anyway. And slowly, that started to affect everything. I stopped going out, stopped making plans, stopped doing things that used to make me feel like myself, because I was always tired. Not the kind of tired sleep can fix, the kind of tired that comes from giving too much of yourself for too long. But still, I kept going, because stopping didn't feel like an option, until one moment forced me to see things differently. It was a normal afternoon. I had just gotten my paycheck, and for the first time in a long time, I decided something. I was going to keep it. Not all of it. Just enough to do something for myself. Something small. Something that reminded me that I existed too. I remember standing there, holding that decision in my mind, like it was something fragile, something that could break at any moment. And then my phone rang. Evan, of course. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, already knowing what he was going to say, and I answered, "Hey, I need help." No greeting, no hesitation, just straight to it. And something inside me tightened. Not anger, not frustration, just exhaustion. The kind that doesn't come from one moment, but from years of the same pattern. "I can't right now." The words almost didn't come out, because they felt so unfamiliar. There was silence on the other end. Then, "Are you serious?" I closed my eyes. "Yes." Another pause. Then his tone changed. Not loud, but different, colder. "Wow." And then he hung up, just like that. No understanding, no conversation. Just disappointment. And for a moment, I felt guilty. Like I had done something wrong, like I had failed him somehow. But then something inside me pushed back. Why did saying no feel like a mistake? Why did choosing myself feel like betrayal? That question stayed with me, and it started to change something. Not all at once, but slowly. I began to notice patterns. The way people came to me when they needed something, but rarely asked how I was doing. The way my presence was expected, but not always appreciated. The way I had built a life where I existed for everyone else, but not for myself. And once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. It follows you. It lingers. It changes the way you feel about everything. And that's when the exhaustion turned into something else. Clarity. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep giving pieces of myself away and pretending it didn't matter. Because it did. It mattered more than anything. And for the first time, I started to understand something. If I didn't choose myself, no one else would. And that realization was both freeing and terrifying. Because choosing yourself means changing everything. And change comes with consequences. People react, people pull away, people don't always understand. But still, something in me knew it was time. If you've ever felt like the one who carries everything, the one everyone depends on, but no one really checks on, take a second and be honest with yourself. When was the last time you chose you? And if this story feels familiar, you're not alone. You can stay, because sometimes hearing it out loud is the first step to changing it. And that's exactly where everything began to shift for me. Not in one big moment, but in the small decisions I started making every day. And I didn't know it yet, but those small decisions were about to change everything. The change didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic moment where everything suddenly made sense. No single conversation that fixed everything overnight. It started quietly, in the small decisions I made every day, the moments where I chose to pause instead of react, the moments where I didn't immediately step in to fix things, the moments where I let silence exist instead of filling it. At first it felt unnatural, like I was going against something deeply rooted in me, because for so long my identity had been tied to being needed, to being the one who showed up, to being the one who carried everything. So when I stopped doing that, even a little, it felt like I was losing a part of myself. But what I didn't realize at the time was this: I wasn't losing myself. I was finally meeting myself. And that realization didn't come easily. It came through discomfort, through moments of doubt, through the quiet tension that started to grow in my family. Because when you change, people notice, and not always in the way you expect. Evan was the first to react, not directly, not openly, but in the way he pulled away. He stopped calling as often, stopped sharing things, stopped expecting me to step in. And at first, I thought that was a good thing. I told myself it meant he was figuring things out on his own. But there was something else there, too. A distance that hadn't existed before, like he didn't quite know how to relate to me anymore, because I wasn't playing the same role I always had, and that made things unfamiliar. Sarah was different. Her reaction was quieter, more emotional. There were moments where I could hear it in her voice, the hesitation, like she wasn't sure if she could still come to me the way she used to. And that hurt, more than I expected, because I never wanted her to feel like I wasn't there for her. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't go back to carrying everything, not without losing myself again. And that balance, that space between being there and not losing yourself, is harder than people think. My parents took longer to adjust. For years they had seen me one way, dependable, available, always willing. So when that shifted, they didn't immediately understand it. There were moments of silence, moments where conversations felt slightly off, moments where I could feel their expectations, even when they didn't say anything. And for a while, that made me question myself again. It made me wonder if I was being too distant, too cold, too different. Because when you've spent your whole life being one version of yourself, changing that can feel like you're doing something wrong, even when you're not. But then something happened that made everything clear. It was another evening, similar to so many before. I had just gotten home from work, tired, but not the same kind of tired I used to feel. This was different, lighter, more grounded. And when I walked into the house, I could tell something was off. The atmosphere felt tense, heavy. My mum was sitting quietly, my dad looked distracted, and Evan was there, pacing, frustrated. He had lost another opportunity, another plan that didn't work out, another situation where things didn't go the way he expected. And as soon as he saw me, I could feel it, that familiar shift, the expectation, the moment where everything usually fell onto me. "Caroline," he said. And there it was, that tone, the one that assumed I would step in, fix it, make it better. I stood there for a second, just looking at him, not reacting immediately, not jumping in, just present. And in that pause, something changed, not just in me, but in the room, because they were all waiting for the version of me they were used to, the one who would say, "Don't worry, I've got it," the one who would take responsibility for something that wasn't hers. But that version of me was no longer there. "I can't fix this for you." The words came out calmly, not harsh, not emotional, just honest. And for a moment, no one said anything. Evan looked at me, confused, frustrated, like he didn't recognize who I was anymore. "What do you mean you can't?" he asked. And this time, I didn't feel guilty. "I mean, you have to figure this one out." There was silence again, but it felt different, not tense, not heavy, just real, because for the first time, I wasn't stepping in to carry something that didn't belong to me. And that moment was the turning point, not just for me, but for all of us. Because when you stop overgiving, people are forced to adjust, not immediately, not perfectly, but eventually. Evan didn't respond the way he usually did. There was no argument, no frustration that turned into blame. He just stood there for a second, then walked away. And for the first time, I didn't follow, I didn't fix it, I didn't step in, I let it be. And that was one of the hardest things I had ever done, but it was also the most important, because that's when things started to shift. Not dramatically, not overnight, but slowly. Evan started handling things differently, not perfectly, but more independently. Sarah began to grow in her own way, learning how to process things without immediately relying on me, and my parents started seeing me differently, not as the one who would always carry everything, but as someone who had her own limits, her own needs, her own life. And then came the moment I'll never forget. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it meant everything. It was my birthday, and for the first time in my life, I didn't plan it, I didn't organize anything, I didn't remind anyone, I didn't carry the responsibility of making it happen. I simply let it be. And when I walked into the house that evening, I stopped, because everything was already there. The table was set, the food was ready, there was a cake, simple, but thoughtful. And for a second, I didn't move, because I wasn't used to this. I wasn't used to being the one who didn't have to hold everything together. "Come sit," my mum said softly, and there was something in her voice that I hadn't heard before. Not expectation, not pressure, but care, real care. I sat down slowly, still trying to process what I was seeing, and throughout the dinner, something felt different. No one asked me for anything. No one brought up problems. No one placed anything on my shoulders. They were just there, present, with me. And then my dad spoke. He didn't say much, but what he said meant everything. "We didn't realize," he paused, like he was choosing his words carefully, "how much you were carrying." And just like that, everything became clear. Because it wasn't that they didn't care, it wasn't that they didn't love me, it was that they didn't see it, because I never showed them. I had made it look easy. I had made it look like I could handle it. I had made it look like it didn't cost me anything, so they believed that. And when I finally stopped, they finally saw. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to understand, enough to change. And in that moment, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel resentment. I just felt seen, for the first time in a long time. And the truth is, by then, I didn't need it the way I used to, because I had already learned something more important. My worth was never in what I could do for others. It was never in how much I could carry. It was never in how much I could sacrifice. My worth was in who I was. And once I understood that, everything changed. Not just around me, but within me. I no longer felt the need to prove myself. I no longer felt guilty for choosing myself. I no longer felt like I had to earn my place in my own life, because I had already paid the price, and I wasn't willing to keep paying it. Not anymore, because the truth is, if you keep giving without boundaries, people will keep taking without realizing it. Not because they're bad, but because they don't see the cost. And if you never show them, they never will. But when you finally stop, when you finally choose yourself, when you finally step back and say, "This is enough," everything changes. Not instantly, not perfectly, but meaningfully. And sometimes, by the time people realize what you've been carrying, it's almost too late. Almost. But not always, because sometimes, there's still time to rebuild things differently, healthier, stronger, more balanced. And that's what we did. Not perfectly, but honestly. And that made all the difference. If you've ever felt like the one who carries everything, the one who shows up for everyone else, but feels invisible in the process, I want you to hear this. You don't have to lose yourself to be loved. You don't have to sacrifice everything to matter. And you don't have to wait until you're completely exhausted to choose yourself. Start small, one decision at a time, one boundary at a time, one moment where you say, "I matter too." And if this story spoke to you, you can stay, because there's more stories like this, waiting for you.